afternoon, this is Mary Hunt for the January 26, 2021 WATERtea with Dr. Mary Condren. We're going to be preparing to celebrate the Festival of Brigit. I'm so glad that you're all here today. Special greetings to those friends from Canada who've worked with Mary and to those friends from Ireland who live and work with Mary. We're glad to have each and every one of you with us for this WATERtea. We actually had an earlier tea this month. It was what we called the impromptu special tea after the attack on the U.S. Capitol. Since then, the dignified and historic inauguration of President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have buoyed our spirits here in the U.S. and led us to hope against hope for a better day. We move forward with that hope and also with a certain trepidation, being realists about what is ahead of us. But today we welcome you in a special way to this tea with Dr. Mary Condren from Dublin, Ireland. I will introduce Mary. She will share some ideas on preparing to celebrate the Festival of Brigit, and we'll have a chance to ask questions, to make remarks in the plenary. And then following the plenary, there'll be a final blessing, and then we'll have an opportunity to continue conversation for those who wish. But the official program will conclude with the final piece of music. That will be at the top of the hour or at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. The Zoom link will stay open for those who wish to continue conversation. The video of this session may be found at our website at www.waterwomensalliance.org, along with some notes. So don't worry if you miss terms or spellings. Just enjoy the presentation, and most of all, bask in the power of Brigit. Let me introduce my friend Mary Condren. Mary Condren is a feminist scholar who studied theology, sociology, and social anthropology at the University of Hull. She came to the U.S. to study religion and society at Boston College, went on to do a doctorate in religion, gender, and culture at Harvard University, where she was a research associate in the Women's Studies program at Harvard Divinity School. Dr. Condren lives in Dublin, where she's a research associate in women's studies at the Center for Gender and Women's Studies, Trinity College, Dublin, and the founder and national director of Women's Spirit Ireland. Women's Spirit Ireland is a wonderful group. We think of them as a sister group to us. Here's how they describe themselves. Women's Spirit Ireland, the Institute for Feminism and Religion, aims to explore a prophetic approach to feminism and religion, inclusive of many traditions and the emerging consciousness in Ireland. The Institute provides opportunities for women to reclaim religion by engaging theoretically and experientially with the issues of feminist theology, ethics, spirituality, and ritual. You can see the natural connection with water, and we've had many long years of friendly and delightful companionship on this search for new forms of feminist spirituality. Dr. Condren lectures and writes on a range of topics, both in Celtic mythology and contemporary problems. Her book, The Serpent and the Goddess, Women, Religion, and Power in Celtic Ireland, is a classic in the field. Her forthcoming work on Brigid, perhaps will be several volumes, foreshadowed by articles on mercy, not sacrifice, for example, promises to be a field shaper in Brigid studies for generations to come. Mary has published countless articles and chapters that showcase her encyclopedic knowledge of Brigid, which will be on display this afternoon. Many people, we at Water and some of our Canadian participants today, and certainly her Irish colleagues, have been part of Mary's unforgettable and inspiring Brigid ritual. I recall one here in this office some years ago now, when we embodied the various aspects of the woman for whom my grandmother was named, Brigid. So welcome, Dr. Mary Condren, and I only wish we were together, either here at the water table having tea or in your cozy kitchen with scones. We look forward to your wisdom and to a chance to join in dialogue with you. Please welcome Dr. Mary Condren for our conversation today, looking at preparation to celebrate the Festival of Brigit. Mary Condren.
Thank you, Dr. Hunt, for such an elegant and over-the-top presentation, which I deeply also appreciate. I want to say I'm very privileged to have this opportunity to work with you today, and I want to acknowledge the work of many women in women's spirit for many years who have worked on bringing the Festival of Brigit to the present shape that it's in. I also want to thank the Circle in Canada for the real privilege of having worked with them over a 7-year period, because they have midwifed information out of me that I didn't know was there and probably wasn't until I met them. And I also want to thank the Water for the ongoing support and encouragement and resources that they have given me for over so many years. And thank you all for coming here today. And I'm delighted to be able to share some of my recent work on Brigid and her sisters, because she had many sisters, and that's one of the things that I've found out about her a little bit. Now, I'm going to focus today on the theme of, so there are many themes in Brigid, but particularly on her festival, because this is her festival time. And it's about welcoming the light. It's about renewal. Imbolc is about purification, and it's about preparing for new creativity. And the original figure attached to Imbolc, and I know this is going to be a little bit contentious, but I will be able to, I think, establish it when I actually write this material up. The original figure attached to Imbolc was, in fact, a woman called Lasser. And Lasser in the Scandinavian tradition means the light woman. And the light woman means the midwife, she who brought people to birth. And in one of the lives of Brigid, she gave her church to Brigid. Effectively, anything associated with Lasser then became attached to Imbolc under the name of Brigid. And that's okay. I'm not complaining about it. I'm simply saying that the traditions of Lasser, which are all over Ireland, but which very seldom get a look in, are redolent of the imagery of Imbolc. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But I want to open by welcoming the light. And to do that, one of the brilliant songs or pieces of music that we use in our events is a piece by Sean Davey, sung by Rita Connolly. And it's a welcome to the light, welcome to the new sun, which comes at this time of the year. Although our Druid friend Emer would say it's not until the 15th of February, but I hope she will give me absolution on this occasion for this time. Anyway, so can I invite you to relax, sit back and listen to this beautiful music and ask yourself and meditate on what brings you the light. How are the many ways in which light enters your world? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sonali. And I know that Water have sent you out the English words to that song, but I'll just recite them just for the sake of our work today. Hail to thee, thou son of the seasons. As thou traversest the skies aloft, the steps are strong on the wing of the heavens. Thou art the glorious mother of the stars. Thou liest down in the destructive ocean without impairment and without fear. Thou risest up on the peaceful wave crest like a queenly maiden in bloom. I am in hope in its proper time that the great and gracious God will not put out from me the light of grace, even as thou dost leave me this night. Now, I have to say it's a little strange to be starting with imagery from another occasion. But just for the sake of those of you who might be organizing Brigid festivals this year or maybe in the future, let me tell you how we use that music in Canada. We normally start with a group of dancers, maybe about 8 of them, around the heart space, which is where all the candles and the beautiful flowers are. And they lie down as people come in singing, "We've wrath Brigid shin," we are gathered under Brigid's cloak. And they don't move at all, hardly, until the drums begin to roll. And then they come up finger by finger, by finger, by toe, by arm, by foot. And then they come up and they start dancing and gradually go around the whole room and bring everybody in, so that at the end, everybody is dancing with them. It's a fabulous piece of music, and I hope that it will gain traction in Brigid festivals in the future, because it really is extremely important. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the artifacts of the festival, and the one that people are most familiar with is the cloak, which is put out overnight to collect the dew of mercy. And Anali is going to show us some images of the cloak, which, because one of the things that I've learned, like when you ask somebody, you know, what's the most important thing about Brigid, they'll say, you know, she wanted land and she asked a rich man, and the rich man gave her, said, okay, let's spread out your cloak. And she spread it out and it covered the whole Curragh of Kildare. And that's all we ever knew about the cloak when we started Festivals of Brigid maybe 30 years ago. Now, however, we understand the cloak at a whole different level, because it is a symbol of female divinity. It's a symbol of mercy. And the 2 images you've seen there are those of the Virgin Mary. Unfortunately, I don't have one of Brigid and the cloak at the moment, but that's a typical image of Brigid, of Mary, and of other female divinities all around the world. And this is an image of Kuan Yin, the Chinese female figure of divinity. And what she's doing there is she's pouring the dew of mercy over her petitioners, because the idea of putting out the cloak is to soak up the precious dew of the earth, which was a sacred fluid before the blood of sacrifice took over and took all before it. Now the second image, and I know I'm going through these things, I'll be going through them fairly quickly. The second image we will be looking at will be Brigid's crosses. And that's a particularly beautiful one, made in Faughart and presented to me by a friend on a cloth by another couple of very important friends. The cross has many, many meanings, and the internet is full of them. But the one that I like best is the fact that it replicates the eye goddess. And in Old Irish law, there's something called the crime of the eye. And what it means is, if you see something happening that is criminal or exploitative or violent, and you do not report it, you become as guilty as the perpetrator. That is in the old Irish Brehon laws. So I think that's what the cross might begin to mean for us today. The second major artifact then would be water, because in our Brigid festivals, when we come to the point of celebrating our final ritual, the first thing that we do is we wash our hands. and sometimes we put the water on our faces. And the reason for that is that the patriarchal writers, when they started talking about Brigid or recognizing her existence, they composed many poems about what Brigid did not do. And one of the things she did not do was she never washed her hand or her feet or her head among men. That's what we call a bit of negative history. And of course, we have to wash our feet. We leave off our feet because the Canadians are a bit proper about these things, but we certainly wash our feet and our hands before we start the in-bulk ritual. So water is extremely important, and it also puts Brigid in alignment with the Cailleach. The Cailleach is the old Irish figure of creation, or certainly the woman who shaped the landscapes. And at every seasonal turn, she went down to the lake and she washed her cloak. And so washing your face again is part of the purification rituals. And there are great things that they say in what Brigid did not do, but I'll spare you all the details just for now. Brigid's miracles were absolutely prolific, and one of the most important ones that she performed had to do in relation to bread. Like Jesus Christ, whenever there was a shortage of bread, not a bother on Brigid. She just multiplied them all over and made sure that there was enough to go around for everyone. And now, of course, we learn from people like Maria Gimbutas that bread was a very important symbol of fertility. The ancient Hindu scriptures say everything is food, but bread is the great mother. In many cultures, the rising dough is compared to a woman's pregnancy, a physical manifestation of a primal transformational force. And as I said, she performed many miracles around the whole question of bread. But the other food, I should say, that is related to Brigid is milk. And again, in the triads of Old Ireland, it said that the three things that renew the world are the womb of a woman, the udder of a cow, and the moulding block of the smith. These were three extremely important issues. And there's a poem, and I probably don't have permission to read it, but I think Brigid will again give me absolution, I hope anyway. It's from Uallacháin, and it's about milk, and I think it's a brilliant poem. Could he have known that any stranger's baby crying out loud in a street can start the flow, a stain that spreads on fustian or denim? This is kindness, which in all our human time has refused to learn propriety, which still knows nothing but the depth of kinship, the depth of thirst. So milk, like the dew, was a primary fluid in the old Irish religions. The infant baby Brigid was, of course, baptized in milk. And according to tradition, the abbesses of Kildare could only drink from the milk of the red-eared white cow, as indeed that was the case for Brigid also. Now, I mentioned that Brigid had many sisters. Another one of her sisters was Gobnet, who today is associated with Ballyvourney, County Cork. And Gobnet's festival is traditionally on the 11th of February, but that's because that feast is still following the old tradition, the old calendar. But, so originally she may, or, Brigid's festival would originally have been on the 11th of February as well, until the calendar was moved. We won't go into the details. And so that's where we find, in our festivals, we wash our hands and our faces, then we take the bread and we dip it in the honey. I'm doing it in reverse at the moment. And then we dip it in the milk, and then we take it as our holy food for the festival. And so Gobnet was associated with honey and with the bees. And if you read the lives of Gobnet, there are, again, many images resonant of an old European tradition of divinity. She wouldn't rest until she found a place with 9 deer in it. She is said to have resisted invaders by her swarm of bees. Now, in the Greek tradition, of course, the bee is related to Melissa. and Melissa in the Hebrew tradition to Deborah. And they were the female religious authority figures in old Europe. And so my hunch is that Gobnet was also related in some way to the old European tradition. But there's very little, she doesn't have a life extant. She's only mentioned in the lives of male saints. And so again, we have to do an awful lot of work to find out a little bit more about her. She's also related to the Cailleach, because there's a great story about the Cailleach that a man tried to steal from her honeypot, and she threatened anyone who did not respect her. And when the guy came to steal the pot, thinking there was loads of money, he was so disappointed only to find there was honey in it. And of course, her point is that the food of honey is more important than money. And that theme runs through the old Irish system. I leave the bees for the moment, although there's a lot more about that we could talk about, because what I really want to focus on now is the Chris, the belt of Brigid. And I have to again credit my Canadian friends, because in one of our first Brigid festivals in Canada, I was, we had started off using a Chris because we kind of knew that's what we kind of had to do. That was part of the Inbog tradition, but we didn't know an awful lot about it, except to put one foot in and the left foot in, and you did whatever. But when I was working in Canada, one of the women said, oh my God, when I was working in Africa as a midwife, I could never practice midwifery unless I had my belt. I thought that is fascinating. And so, of course, I had to go and find out what exactly was behind the belt. And okay, that's the belt that's in the water office. That's the traditional Chris. Now, if we just go back to that analogy, you'll see there are 3 crosses attached to it. But when I look at the images of old Europe, the images attached to it can take the form of mushrooms. They can take the form of various kind of buttons with imprints on them. And my hunch at this point is that the Chris is some way related to the belt of Orion. And I've come across some sources that would also suggest that. But of course, in a Christian tradition, the crosses would have supplanted any reference to the starry skies. Now, if you look at the next couple of images, you'll see a woman holding on to a birthing belt. And this was a typical image in indigenous societies as a way of helping her to give birth. And in the Navajo tradition, there's another one. That's a painting by a woman called Bonnie. I can't remember her second name. Bonnie Hicks, yeah. And that's in the Navajo tradition, where everyone around holds on to the woman, and she holds on to the birthing belt as she tries to give birth. Now, a Chris is said to ease the pain of labor, to speed delivery, and also to abort a dead fetus. And there's a very important article by a guy called Walter Dillings, who researched the whole use of the girdle in medicine. That's it. Yes. Now, you remember that in the Bible, Thomas didn't really believe in Christ's resurrection. And so Jesus invited him to put his hand in his side so that he would indeed, be persuaded that he had been killed. The same thing happened to Mary. When Mary assumed into heaven, doubting Thomas was off away to India. He was off on a gallivant to India. And so when he came back, he didn't believe that Mary had assumed into heaven. So what did she have to do? Was she had to come back. There are various versions of the story, but she had to come back and drop her girdle down to Thomas in order to persuade him that she had in fact ascended into heaven. Now, the question is, what is the meaning of the belt, and why would it be important as a symbol of renewal and regeneration? And again, I'm just going to give you several hunches that I have at the moment. One is, the story comes from Scotland, that one guy went to observe the traditions at Imbolc in Scotland, and he saw a woman putting a coal into a sock and going out and banging on the ground. And he asked her what she was doing, and then he recorded this verse: "Today is the day of bride. The serpent shall come from the hole. I will not molest the serpent, nor will the serpent molest me." This is the day of bride. The queen will come from the mound, I will not touch the queen, nor will the queen touch me. And so the question then is, who was the noble queen? Now, Seamus Uallacháin, who's one of our most distinguished recorder of the living traditions, he considers that the noble queen was a swarm of bees. And I'm not going to argue about that at the moment, but this is an image I found from Uallacháin in Mexico. And here very clearly, the belt is represented by two serpents tied around the belly of the person. And so some people say that the belt represents a serpent. And in midwifery practices, it turns out, again in Walter Dilling's article, that some of the time, the women used the skin that the serpent had shed. And if there was a difficult labor or a difficult pregnancy, that skin would be wrapped around the woman's body in order to help her to give birth or to ease the pain. Again, there are many, many references to that. In Lithuania, snakes were kept in homes for protection. The serpent then represents in symbolic terms the Nyart, or the Shakti, or the Kundalini energy. That's one possible interpretation as to what the Chris might mean. I've also come across references from Plato, of all people, and he talks about the belt surrounding the earth, that there is a belt surrounding the earth, and there's a distaff, or a thing that goes all the way through the earth. And again, Plato's information, even though it's coming from an Indo-European perspective, draws very heavily on the old European symbolism and traditions. And of course, the other image has to do with Orion, because as I said, many of these belts will have three images on them, as though the women or whoever was wearing it for healing or for pregnancy or almost in death, wished to align themselves with the energy of Orion. And so very often people say, when you're working with Brigid, should Brigid be worshipped or adored? Should we, as it were, put all the accoutrements of patriarchal religion onto Brigid and just go on as usual? And my answer to that would be saying no. Going to Brigid or turning to Brigid is not about being worshipping or adoring, it's about alignment. And this is represented very specifically by the Chris. The serpent is the traditional symbol of DNA. It's a primordial symbol of the need for alignment. Asclepius, the god of medicine, and the double helix represents the double serpent. It's alignment at several levels. It's bodily alignment. And when we dance at Brigid festivals, we do what we call defocalization, or we get out of our heads in order to listen to the cellular memories that are in the body. In other words, we are doing what feminist theorists have talked about for a long time: let the body speak. We're also trying in the images and stories of Brigid to foster community alignment. And when we use the Chris and when we go through the Chris at the end of our Brigid festivals, we are making commitments to community alignment based on justice and on mercy. And finally, we're using the Chris for cosmic alignment. In other words, we're using the Chris is not a simple or not it's not a simple thing to do. It's a very serious act to go through the Chris, as we do in our final Chris ceremony, because we are committing ourselves to do everything in our power to be aligned with the rhythms and the needs of the cosmos, and especially the rhythms and the needs of the earth on which we stand. Finally, we welcome Brigid into, and in the final part of our ceremony, we welcome Brigid into our assembly. And as part of our earlier preparations, we might have made little bridogs, little Brigids, and we placed them on the hearth, because the hearth is where the ancestors live. And so we are also, in placing Brigid there, we are recognizing the profound treasury that we have received from our ancestors, and also our profound commitment to passing on those traditions on to the future. And so I'm going to, we end our ceremonies usually. I'll just say a little bit about the Chris, what we do with the ceremony. When we go through the Chris, we go through it left, two people hold it to begin with, and we walk through it and turn left. And then we let go of all the negativity, all the regrets, all of the things that we wish we had done or had done for us or whatever it happens to be. We go back in again when we turn right. And when we turn right, we're giving thanks for everything we have received for the past year. And then finally, we go through it for the final time. And that's when we make our commitments to the year to come. And so that we will honor those commitments. But usually we give it a little token. One year it was a whistle for the whistleblowers to give them courage. Another year it could be an acorn, or it could be many different things depending on the theme of the ceremony. But we usually at this point then welcome Brigid into our assembly. And we have a beautiful piece of music composed by Eithne and Uallacháin. And again, normally when we do this, Brigid has knocked on the door and she says, "Ligastock breed, let Brigid in." And the people inside say, "Shibaha, Shibaha," which is to say, "You're welcome, you're welcome." And then Brigid comes in to this extraordinary piece of music. So Anali, thank you.
Okay.
Is unfolding now, the time's upon us, only have we eyes to see your epiphany.
Now you have those beautiful words on the sheets that Anali and Water have sent out to you, so I won't repeat them here, but they are incredibly beautiful. So thank you for listening to me with that sharing, and I'm going to turn it over now to Mary Hunt. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of all of us, Mary Condren, I thank you sincerely for this tour de force, this move through the Brigit Festival, and this real invitation to celebrate this ourselves in however large or small a form. You might have noticed Diane and I were trying to show the Chris at one point. We have it here in the water office as a deep memory of your visit when we did that. And I can still remember the feeling of walking into the Chris. I can see Joe Cinto doing it and other people. It's a powerful, powerful thing. Mary Condren, thank you. You have a probably 3-volume bestseller on your hands here, and we await it. So please mind yourself and make this available as soon as possible. Let us know how we can help. The discussion is now open. We will have conversation with Mary Condren. We'll end at the top of the hour, and then some of us will stay on to keep talking, but just to be official about it and to respect everybody's time, we'll go until the top of the hour. So this is the water tea. This is our discussion. I just want to mention, I mentioned it in the chat, but just for the record, that while we had upgraded this Zoom call to 300 or 500, for some reason, Zoom didn't quite get the message correctly. So a number of people have not been able to get in with us today. And so if you have friends who complain that they were not able to enter, say we did everything we could, and we will make the audio and visual parts of this available for their use. But we sincerely apologize for what occurred, which was, despite our best efforts, the failure of Zoom to expand, as it were. So you know, you pay your money and nothing happens. So take a lesson. Jeanette Stokes, you're first, and I'm happy to see you.
Lovely to be here. Mary Condren, when you and Mary Hunt and I were together in the summer of 1976, I think we were sort of all on the front end of learning about feminine images of the divine and taking them into our bodies in a more intuitive way. So listening to you talk, I'll make a short statement and would like for you to comment, which is that Brigid is apparently the mother goddess of the British Isles and connected to all the images of the source of life, the mother, the creatrix around the world, whether it's Tara in Tibet or Kali or Kwan or whoever. So say a few words, if you would, about these cross-cultural connections with other figures of the Great Mother.
Okay, well, I'm going to be very blasphemous now in terms of Celtic studies, because Celtic studies have usually, you know, tried to trace where they all came from. You know, was India, did they come from India? Did they come from China? Did the Irish affect the Vikings, or the Vikings affect somebody else? I'm coming to another understanding, and I've been very privileged to train in the Body Soul Rhythms movement set up by Marion Woodman, which continues today. And part of what we try to do in Body Soul, again, is to get in touch with the cellular memories in the body. And so I think rather than trying to figure out who influenced who, I think we all have a commonality in our bodies. And when we allow ourselves and when we allow the body to speak, there are certain images that become very prominent. And that is why they would be taken up in different ways. The cloak is one. The cloak is the cloak of mercy. And in female divinities around the world, I found, you know, create the world or create the landscape with their cloak or with their apron. But the image that I love most is the way the cloak absorbs the dew of mercy, and how the dew was, even in the Hebrew Bible, the dew was, that's D-E-W, was the sacred fluid. And it was only with the religions of empire that blood sacrifice, rather than, you know, mercy, became the dominant ideology, which is, you know, really unfortunate. So I think we need to go back to the body, and, you know, and that's where our commonality lies. We are all basically human. We share the DNA, and that's where the images come from.
First of all, thank you, Jeanette Stokes, for your question, Mary, for your answer. And just to clarify that we were just out of kindergarten that year at Greelville. So please just so that that's on the record. Lisa Walker will be next.
Well, I love what Mary just said about the body and the commonalities, and that if we go back to the body, I practice Nia, and there's a lot of that in Nia as well. And I was thinking, oh, how can we make a routine where we're like dancing the serpent, you know? And then I was struck, and I don't really know how to use this, but this is just something that struck me when you were talking about the Chris, and you were talking about the birthing belts, to ease the pain of labor, to speed delivery, and even to help abort a dead fetus. And right now I'm also attending Valerie Kaur's 10-day revolutionary love thing that she's doing here in the States to start bringing about some healing with all the recent upheavals that we've had and the many years really of just of pain and stuff. But I was just thinking that whole image, because she's kind of famous for her TED Talk, where she talks about, are we in the tomb or are we in the womb? Is this not a time when we are in the womb and we are being called to push and breathe, or to breathe and push? And so that stuff was just going in my head when you were talking about this beautiful symbol of bringing about that delivery and maybe even aborting that dead fetus, which is the old stuff. You know, I don't know. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Condren, any comments?
No, just to say that in the resources that Water will send out in the next few days, I will send the link to an article which is actually online, written by Walter Dillings, and is called The Use of the Girdle in Midwifery. And I've learned a great deal by reading that. So I'm hoping that Anali and Mary and Diane will send that out to you.
Great.
It
Thank you. And that reminds me that we will of course send out the references and so forth. And Lisa, thank you for your question. I think many people are on your wavelength on this. Erin would be next.
Hi, Mary. Thank you so much. And Mary Hunt, thank you so much. This is new to me. And like I've been researching and studying maybe just for the past several months. And I'm wanting like I'm hearing all this information that is really super interesting. And at the same time, like, because I'm with like the women whose shoulders I'm standing on, that's how I feel in this moment. I'm wanting, like, what is the felt sense of Brigid? Like, how do you experience her in your body? Like, I want to feel her essence with you. So I'm wondering if you could, and maybe it's personal, but like, if you could speak like the qualities that she embodies that you hold, and both Marys are, yeah, I'm curious.
Well, she has several qualities, but the one I like best is mercy, because mercy belongs to the prophetic strand in all the religions, all the major religions, and is set very much against the priesthoods. And one of the big dangers that I feel in, you know, the work that we've been doing over the past 40 years with feminism and theology has been maybe to take on board with the great phrase that Mary Hunt gave me years ago, the add women and stir school of feminism, that we just, you know, plead to get in and be accepted. But mercy, I think, is very, very different. And I'm hoping, if Brigid spares me, as my father used to say, or he used to say, well, if God spares me and I get these books out, that the final book will be on Brigid and mercy. And I'll be arguing that her matronage of poetry, healing, and smithwork are the essence of mercy. In other words, you know, what does theology and, you know, evoke poetry? Does it effect healing? And does it integrate nature and culture, which is the essence of smithwork? So they're the things that I find important about Brigid. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you. Yeah, we'll go to Jane and then to Lakshma.
Hi, everybody. Mary Condren. I wrote to you several years ago after hearing you speak on CBC. I live in New Brunswick, Canada, and I really appreciated hearing you talk about Brigid. It was the first time I'd ever heard about her as a figure, and it made an indelible impression on me. I'm writing a novel right now and talking a little bit about the Christian baptism. And I'm wondering, you know, maybe you or even some folks from the Water group, is there any kind of relation between Brigid and baptism and any kind of water, those types of rebirth water rituals?
I think I'll turn over to the Water people to answer that one. How about you, Mary or Diane?
That would be in Diane's bailiwick.
Where's Diane?
I think the answer is definitely yes. And I think, once again, go back into our bodies. It's our mother's womb that the water's broken and we're born. And I think that in terms of Christianity, the patriarchy grabbed that and made a sacrament of baptism out of it. And I think that we feminists who are reclaiming our roots put that out. So however you can say that in your novel, there it is, the heart of it.
Thanks, Jane, for your question. That was Diane New of Water, whose book Stirring Waters on Liturgies and Rituals probably has a lot to say about that in the rituals that she offers. Laxna?
Yes, Mary, thank you so much for your presentation. Not only now, but the links you gave us in the Goddess Scholars listserv to the Sligo landscape videos, those were marvelous. And hearing about Brigid and her cloak, defining the landscape, makes such a great link to that sojourn that you led us on. A couple of things. I'm a particular devotee of women's bellies, not only as our power of procreation, creating new life as human beings, but the source of life, the power to promote creation. And so in my travels, I've come across something you might be interested in if you don't know about it already. Notre Dame la Noire, the Black Madonna in Toulouse, France. Mm-hmm. Part of the tradition there is that there's a white ribbon that's available to women who are or want to be pregnant to ask Mary's beneficence for their pregnancy. So there's another piece. Mm-hmm. But I do want to ask you more about the landscape. Do you see a connection between the circlet, the belt, and the cairns, that pregnant belly shape in the landscape?
I haven't made that connection myself, but I've just been reading one of the articles I've been reading, really been struck by is the difference between the shape of the pre-Indo-European wombs or mounds that are in the landscape. And when we come into patriarchy, we have rectangular, we have square shapes, and we have spires going way up to the heavens. Now, if that was not, a product of female or male morphology or, the wisdom of the body, I don't know what is. But I haven't connected it specifically with the belt. But Walter Dillings, in the article that I'm quoting on the girdles and midwifery, he has quite a lot of information about how the girdle was used in different cultures. Of course, he dismisses it as, sympathetic magic or imitative magic, or, it was all before the genuine medics arrived on the scene to teach us the best way of doing these things. But nevertheless, there's a huge amount of information in there. So I think, that'd be very interesting to look at in greater detail. Also, I want to say, just if I may, because I know we're nearing the end of this particular part of thing. The Circle, which I've worked with over a number of years, based in London, Ontario, is also having a Brigid event online on February the 28th. I think it's February the 28th, and that will be for a little bit of a longer period. And the women who've been involved in that for 7 or 8 years will be able to speak a little more about their experiences of working with some of these images and the music and the rituals. So maybe that information can also go out with the water information when Mary and Diane and Ali send it out. That's okay.
Right, just send it to us. We'll be happy to share it with this group. I want to raise a question at some point, Mary. It doesn't have to be now, but to think about the question of appropriation and how these rituals for people who aren't coming from the tradition out of which they come, what does it mean to use them? I think of, for example, the critiques of Native American women, especially of some early feminists who were using rituals from the Native American traditions in ways that were considered inappropriate. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, because we certainly don't want to encroach upon or be or appropriate symbols or rituals to which we don't have the right. And I think you might have a different take on that than perhaps others have in the past. Any
Oh,
thoughts on that?
definitely. Bridget said, let them all come. And that's the mantle of Mary. Mary said, let them all come. She has every color and size and whatever under her mantle. And I think if we focus on the fact that we are all inhabiting human bodies, I mean, I know that the American Indians have had a very rough time, just as the Irish have had a very rough time. We were colonized for 800 years, for heaven's sake, and we've lost a huge number of our traditions. And, you know, what I find really interesting is that when we started the Brigid event, the first major one we did was in 1994 in Termonfeckin in County Louth. And we didn't have a clue. I mean, I'd written about the, you know, Brigid and the Serpent and the Goddess, and it was published in 1989, but I had no understanding of the living traditions. But we learned over the years because we listened to the women bringing in their stories and what their grandmothers had told them. And then we had a kind of a cellular memory. I keep going back to that. There's a cellular memory of certain things. And we kind of, like Robert Graves talks about it, he says, when the shiver goes up your spine, you know that you are in touch with authenticity. And so I think, you know, because I lived in the United States for about 7 years, and I was involved in many rituals, and I often felt that, you know, trying to create them out of nothing, you know, make them up as you go along. And I feel very privileged to have been able to go back to Ireland and to encounter the living traditions. And I have, you know, I'm older than I'd like to be at this point, and regret that I didn't get more in touch with the living traditions over the years, because I've learned tremendously by going into the countryside and, you know, talking with people and learning their attitudes and their stories. So I don't think it's a matter of either or. As I said, if the DNA, we have the belt, we have the cloak, which is a common symbol, we have the kris, which is a common symbol, we have the cross, which is a common symbol, and there are other common symbols, the milk, the honey, and the bread. And I think it's recuperating the symbols. We don't need to recuperate the dogma. You know, Brigid is not about dogma. Brigid is about, you know, cultivating creativity in everyone.
Well, Mary Condren, you have done that today. And as one person put in the chat, you have cast the cloak around the world for those of us on this call. So I want to thank you once again before we close our official session, and I invite people to send their applause and their blessings and their gratitude to you. You sent shivers up our spines. We will end with a benediction and then a musical benediction, and then we will keep the Zoom lines open for those who would like to stay on and chat for a tad. And again, with deep thanks to Mary Condren for this very rich time together. All my best. And now the musical benediction. Brigid's Kiss.
Goman in Uallacháin, goman in Ghrian muid, goman I heres, goman I hir muid, goman I hoyes, goman I has muid, goman I Come on,
Thank you once again, Dr. Mary Condren. Wonderful, wonderful ending with Brigid's Kiss. So the floor is open for conversation. Simply unmute yourself and go ahead when you find an opportunity.
Question?
This is Lisa Skura, and I just wanted to kind of mention my connection with Brigid. I'm Irish and Scottish, but have kind of lost touch with my roots or anything. And so I've been, searching, but I had a dream and I dreamed of Mama Legba, but I did not know who Mama Legba was. So I called the shop in New Orleans and they said that she is pretty much Brigid, Mama Brigid. So I just thought that was interesting, if we talk about the universality of the mother and the symbols. And the other thing that I wanted to say about goddesses is that the baptism, I think, was the renewal of virginity in every season. So goddesses would bathe in their various rivers, and I think that was definitely appropriated by patriarchy. Anyway, I was just wondering if you thought anything about that crossing, the Mama Legba and the voodoo, Haitian voodoo.
Yes, I have read about it, and I've seen how Haitians, use the name of Brigid. I don't know a great deal about it, but certainly what you're saying there about the bathing in the waters. I didn't get into this because there was so much to cover, but I've been very fortunate to have been part of the Institute of Archaeomythology and to have been to Bulgaria about 10 years ago and to meet some of the Bulgarian experts in the living traditions. And what's amazing about the Bulgarians is that the communists and the military never got up the mountains. And so their weaponry was too heavy to get up the mountains. So the older women were able to hold on to the stories and the memories and the traditions. And one of them that I need to explore a bit further is the association with the granny and the midwife at Imbolc, because there's a great deal of information that, you know, the granny or the brídóg, it's very complicated, because sometimes they say the brídóg is washed, but in the old European traditions, the midwife is washed, and she's, you know, thanked for all of the creativity and fertility that she's brought into the culture, and she's given gifts by the local people. But then when you find, you know, a later tradition, like we picked up a calendar in Bulgaria and it said the midwife was thrown into the water, but she wasn't. She was, you know, she was bathed by those who loved her and thanked her for all that she had brought. And again, they have many stories in the Bulgarian tradition about the honey and the water and the milk. And again, we're all on a learning curve. I'm only learning about this stuff, so I don't ever pretend to be an expert in it. I've been jumped in at the deep end, almost, as it were. But there's huge information out there. We can only bring it together in some way.
Thank you so much.
Ms. Stokes, do you have a piece of it?
I wanted to show you the granny doll.
Oh,
so,
good.
At the Resource Center for Women in Ministry in the South, we've made a film about Meinrad Craighead, who was a Catholic visionary artist who lived in a monastery in England and then in New Mexico. And she led workshops and inspired a woman named Eugenia Perry, who had been an art professor, to make art again. And Eugenia started making these granny dolls. This one has an apron with a little tiny ball of yarn and some knitting needles. But when I look at her, I think of the Divine Mother, and thank you for that connection between Imbolc and the granny and midwifery. And I have a question, which is, this Presbyterian would like to know what a Chris is.
A Chris, C-R-I-O-S. Diane, maybe, or Anali, could you show the image of the Chris that you've got in the water office again?
Here it is, made. Here's the cross. Made by Mary Condren. Who made this for us?
Merivale Ghrian. She's a woman from Brittany who came to Ireland, and she has taught us a great deal over the years. So we're very indebted to Merivale. And I have to say, originally, the Chris would have been made of oat straw. And in our first festivals, we used to bring lots of oat straw and we'd make the Chris. And at the end of it, of course, I would always give it away, and then we never didn't have one for the next year. So after a while,
they'll send it to you whenever you need it.
Well, the first one went to Chile, and some missionaries went there years later, and they said, "Oh, we know all about the Chris," because somebody had brought it back to Chris, and they were doing Imbolc in Chile, which is great. But now Merivale makes them out of sheep's wool, mostly out of sheep's wool, and they're very, very beautiful. And then people can use them. That particular, I'll just show you my little Chris, because it doesn't have to be that huge. I have a little Chris here. She's
wearing it.
I'm wearing it. At one of our festivals, I'll take it off. I'll show you.
Can you spell that again, please?
C-R-I-O-S. I put it in the chat.
There it is there. Look, can you see it now?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
At one of our festivals, Ardagh, who's one of the Canadian group, she's a brilliant artist, and she has made some Chrisana, we call them in Irish. But in one of the events, we thought we'd make individual Chrisana, and so we made them. And this is a beautiful one that Ardagh made and gave to me at the end of that event. So you can make smaller ones. You don't have, we use the big one for our festivals, but you can make a smaller one for yourself. And when you put it on, then it's okay. I'm putting this on now. I'm in a role, or I have something to do.
Like a stole. Is it connected to the girdle or to the umbilical cord?
But the umbilical cord is another possible way of thinking about it, because in some, you'll see in the Walter Dilling's article that I will send you the link to. It's on the internet. In some cases, they made the girdle out of human skin.
Oh.
And that was not a nice story. I won't tell it to you now. I'll spoil the energy. But I know that in St. Margaret, for instance, somebody just brought up the question of Notre Dame and the ribbon. But in the traditions of St. Margaret, women went and asked her for the ribbon, and Gobnet as well. Gobnet has another tradition that people ask her for the ribbon, and that will keep them safe in pregnancy. But in in the case of St. Margaret, once a woman had delivered safely, she would bring the umbilical cord and give it to St. Margaret. Now, whatever happened, what St. Margaret did with it, I have no idea. But again, that's part of the tradition. So the
obviously stem cell research. There is a question in the chat from Leah. If you could expand on the quality of mercy and how we can stay present to it in severe situations where forgiveness is difficult. Is the softness and kindness of mercy something which can only arise naturally at the end of a patient wait? That's the question, and it'll be followed by Cynthia Tootle, who will ask the next one. But anyway, just a question for you, Mary.
Well, thank you, Leah, for the question. And for me, the quality of mercy comes from consciousness and comes from, you know, Brigid has a great saying. Somebody came up to her one time and, you know, she said, oh, what's that person doing? That's a body without a head. And she's had the saying that the soul friend, somebody without a soul friend is like a body without a head. In other words, we need constantly those who bring us, who will call us into soul, which is what the word that she used, or call us into consciousness. And mercy, I think, only comes when you realize how ambivalent we all are. And that's the great thing about the serpent as well. The serpent is ambivalent. You know, it brings both life and death, and that image is both life-giving and death-dealing. That once we embrace our own ambivalence, then I think we can begin to extend mercy to everybody else. Understanding, you know, and recognizing that. But it's a long journey. It's a long journey. And I think the, you know, the tradition in the Catholic Church in which I was brought up was always to repress any difficult energies and difficult emotions and difficult whatever. And it always came out anyway. It came out in a devious and a perverse way. The tradition of mercy is to bring to consciousness and to work. And it's a lifelong work. It's not easy. It's lifelong. But I think one of the big things about mercy is the image of the cloak, because whereas the altar of sacrifice divides, you know, you can come so long as you're not gay or transgender or you've had an abortion or you've done this, that, or the other, you can come. The altar of sacrifice is a way of separating the wheat from the chaff. And even Jesus said, don't, for God's sake, separate the wheat from the chaff. Wait until the end of the world when all that will be sorted out, because that splitting is at the heart of patriarchal culture.
Okay, well, I wanted to make a comment about the baptism question. The one visit I took to Ireland, I visited a Brigid Spring, and I know there are Brigid Springs and Wells, that's a thing. And I remember reading a story, I'm afraid I can't give you the source, but a source of her that two men with skin problems, severe skin problems, prayed to her for a cure. Mm-hmm. And she sent them to a well, one of her springs, and said, wash, one of you wash the other. And he did, and the skin problem went away. So she told the other one to wash the one that had just been cured. And the cured guy says, I don't want to touch that guy, I might catch it. So she gave the skin problem back to him and cured the other guy. So it certainly has a quality of cleansing and baptism, and also a lesson to take care of each other. And I'm sorry I don't know the source, but that's one story that really struck in my mind.
It's in the Vita Prima, one of the lives of Brigid, and the two brothers were lepers. She has similar stories, because a woman came and brought her a big bag of apples, right? And she immediately, of course, Brigid passed them on, and the woman said, "I didn't give it to you to give to those awful people down the road." She cursed the woman's orchards. I mean, Brigid was she wasn't putting up with that kind of stuff. She said, if you can't pass it on, forget about it. You know, that's well,
I love those stories because they tell you the heart of the kind of mercy she has.
Yeah.
It's like her lesson. Anyway, and it also struck me very much the cleansing of baptism was in that story. So I'll leave that.
Cynthia Tootle, by the way, is a great expert on goddesses. So Cynthia, this is right up your alley.
Brilliant.
Yes. Ellen is next.
Yeah, I had two things to say and then a question. So the first thing I just wanted to show you, this is a kris that I made years ago out of natural jute. So so that means that it's natural fiber, you know, from plants. So because I don't know how to make one out of straw. So there's that. The other thing is, Mary, you were talking about the midwives in Bulgaria. The tradition of putting the baby Brigid, the Brigid, before the hearth, she's laid on a bed of straw. In ancient times, and I guess in the Middle Ages too, when a woman gave birth, they would put straw, clean straw, on the floor, and then the woman would give birth on the straw, and then which became bloody. And then when she was finished and everything was done, they would just take the straw outside and burn it. So there's a connection there with the midwives somehow and the straw. That's just something that occurred to me. But then the question I had was at the beginning of the talk, you mentioned, I don't know if it was another saint or a goddess figure, that you said the tradition, and you didn't spell it out. It began with an L, I think. You
Lasser. L-A-S-S-A-I-R.
L-A-S-S-A-I-R. And who is that?
Well, there are churches, you know, and you know, if you look at the dictionaries of the Irish saints, there's about 11 places where there's a person called Lasser, and it means light or it means flame. And the reason I got very interested in Lasser was that a Benedictine monk called Sean O'Dinn, he has written some, you know, he's dead now, but he wrote some great books on Brigid, one great book on Brigid. And he appealed to the traditions of Duhallow in County Cork. And I wish I had a whiteboard or something to show you, but if you just imagine a square, in the top left-hand corner, it's the Cailleach. In the next corner, and the Cailleach presides over Samhain at the 1st of November. In the next corner, you have Lasser, and she presides over Imbolc, okay? And then when you come down, and this is a pilgrim path, you come down to the right-hand square, you have the Inyin Bui. And the Inyin Bui means the daughter of the hag. And then when you go over to the left-hand square, you have Latiran. Now, and then on Samhain, Lasser, the Inyin Bui, and Latiran all disappear back into the Cailleach to hibernate for the winter. And in that area of Duhallow, there are pilgrim paths that have been, you know, and the story is that angels came and made those paths so that they could all, you know, they could all visit one another. But then the Cailleach is the central figure. So you have almost like a triple spiral, another image in which the three figures, you know, go into the Cailleach, and then you have the 3 in 1, but the one is, you know. So that's when I became very interested in Lasser. And then looking at the imagery of Imbolc, you realize so much of it has to do with midwifery. And the other thing that I haven't figured out at all is that at Beannú, which is the 1st of May, you have the Inyin Bui, which is the daughter of the hag. And so you have the Cailleach in one corner and the Inyin Bui at the other, at opposite sides of the ritual year. And in the Scottish tradition, there's a great tradition that Stuart McCarty and others talk about, which is a place in Glen Lyon in Scotland, which has a shieling, which is like a little hut in which they have the Cailleach, the Badach, and their daughter. And on the 1st of May, the Cailleach and the Badach and the daughter come out of are brought out of the shieling to look after and protect the harvest. And then on the 1st of Samhain, they're put back in again. So one of the questions that I have is the Inyin Bui, is that really Brigid? That's the daughter of the hag, because she has inherited many of the features that originally belonged to the Cailleach. And was Lasser really the person most related to the 1st of February? And we don't really know, you see, because the church, you know, Galatius and all that crowd, they all took many of the old festivals and appropriated them and made them into Christian feasts. And so, you know, they made Samhain into the Festival of All Souls. They made Beannú into something else. They ignored Lunas completely on the 1st of August because there was too much debauchery going on. in the festivals. So they thought, you know, because it was the beginning of the first fruits, and they just basically ignored Lunasa. But there's a woman called Maura McNeil who's done a brilliant study of the rites of Lunasa, and she wrote it in the 1940s, but it's a brilliant collection. So these are questions, and that's why, you know, I've been working on these Brigid books for so long, because they're not simple. And I wouldn't want to be the one to say, you know, Brigid really is the Inyin Bui, although I suspect that she is. But I'd be just putting that out as in questions. And I think the midwifery traditions and the Brídóg, you know, bringing the little Brídóg into life at Imbolc is far more suggestive. But I don't have answers. I can only ask questions. That's the great thing about Mercy. You're allowed to ask questions.
No, you don't. But thanks, Ellen, for the question, and thanks, Mary. There's a question in the or a comment in the chat from Susan Walsh. Would you please say more about the serpent and alignment? And she asks for resources about the serpent and the goddess. Well, we know where to look for that in the book by the same title. But would you say something a little bit more about the serpent and alignment?
I really would. You know, there's a great book by a guy called Jeremy Narby. Jeremy Narby, he's a Swiss anthropologist, and he went to the Amazon originally, and he went there to investigate the Amazon rich resources, and then he became totally converted to try to protect the Amazon, and he learned a great deal from the shamanic traditions of the Amazon, and he's got a book called The Cosmic Serpent, and it's a brilliant book. He's written 4 more, or at least 3 others since then, but The Cosmic Serpent was the one that interested me, because he was talking about defocalization, which is getting consciousness down to the cellular level. And shamans have different ways of doing that. You know, some people use hayuska, some people use dancing, some people use meditation, or some people use drumming. But there are different techniques in order to get down. But once you do get down to that level of defocalization, the serpent apparently you know, represents the cellular memory that comes up at that point. So alignment for me, and as I said, I was privileged to have studied in the Body Soul Rhythms program with Marion Woodman and her colleagues. The serpent for me, or the cosmic alignment for me, is getting into your own skin and being comfortable in one's own skin. But then also being an alignment with the cosmos and in alignment with your local community.
And here's the best book, Serpent and the Goddess by Mary Condren. Let's see, Women, Religion, and Power in Celtic Ireland.
Thank you, Diane. It's currently out of print, but you can get it on Amazon.
Yeah. Margaret Roach would like to show and tell.
Coming up. I was one of the people who went to, where was it, Mary, all the way in 1997?
Esker and Athenry.
Athenry. And it was like stepping through the portal of a new world. And I have a lot to thank Mary Condren for, particularly that journey into the reclaiming of, I suppose, the woman's story, her story. But what I really wanted to show you was this magnificent kris, which Merivale made of beautiful wool, and which Mary very kindly presented to me on behalf of Woman's Spirit on the occasion of my ordination as a One Spirit minister. And it's a measure of, I've been sick with COVID, so I wasn't thinking tonight. This is my first time out of bed. And I just wanted to say, Mary, I would have been wearing it earlier. I ran upstairs to bring it down to share it with people. It's such a treasure. And I'm so looking forward to naming my grandson in another little while and placing him in the very safe circle of this magnificent kris. So thank you so much for all that you have been brought to my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. We've had many great walks together. We'll have them in the future when COVID's over.
I hope so. Thanks, Mary, for all of this.
Sure. Thank you.
And for this wonderful kris.
Thank you, Margaret, and I hope it's a healing kris for you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Margaret.
Anybody else before we close our circle for the day. We've taken more of Mary Condren's time than I intended, but she's generous. And it's so rich, Mary Condren. It's so rich.
You know, one last comment. Mary, you really do embody Brigid. That's my final comment.
Diane, don't be silly. I do my best. I aim to do it. Let's put it that way. I think we all can aim to do it, but I don't. I wish I could embody her and more often than I do at the moment. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, it's great to have all of you with us, and especially to have friends from Ireland who have much greater access to all of this than those of us in the diaspora, as it were. But we really wish all of you a wonderful Festival of Brigit coming up on the 1st of February. Mary Condren, your cloak gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and your mercy gathers more dew by the year. So thank you so much. And please join us at Water's events in the future. We'll send you the information on the follow-up notes to this, and you're welcome to use our website, www.waterwomensalliance.org. Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful, safe rest of the day. Be well.